Eric, welcome to Waco. Welcome back to Waco, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you, John. I packed my shorts because as a northerner, I left yesterday, shoveled out 6 inches of snow, and could not wait to get to Waco. So thank you for the nice weather. Not a cloud in the sky, and I'll be sweating in a little while. So perfect.
Perfect. That is great. Well, just wherever you're staying, just make that an extended stay and just stick around for a while.
But you know what? I almost have residency now because we're going up. We'll be back here next week. Then we'll be back for the TCU Baylor women's rematch to close out the regular season. So, I'm looking for, if anybody's got a timeshare, something in Central Texas, I'm all about it. I'll talk. We can talk after the show.
Yeah, we'll fix you up. No problem.
Thank you.
Where is home base for you? Where's that 6 inches of snow?
I grew up in Connecticut, but we live in New Hampshire. So it's been a very, very snowy winter after several winters of not a lot of snow. And I do enjoy my southern trips during February. Let's just say that. Golf season is too delayed for me up in the north. That's the only problem.
I bet that's right. Well, we're glad you're here. Look forward.
Thank you.
You have you've seen Baylor already a couple of times this year, right?
Thrilling game up in Ames when they handed Iowa State their first loss of the season, really figured out a way to take Audie Crooks out of the mix and picked up that huge win. And then most recently, Christy Thomas-Scuddy and I were in Morgantown when Baylor turned it over 30 times. So it was not quite the same kind of feel as when they were at Ames. But I think that's just the Big 12 this year. It's just been incredibly competitive throughout. There's a lot on the line tonight. But I don't think, much like last year, anything's going to be decided for the regular season championship until that regular season finale. And it may very well be Baylor-TCU fighting it out once again for who's going to be the number 1 seed in Kansas City. It's just been a great year. It's so tight at the top. There's 10 teams who are 7-6 or better in the conference. Even though there's a drop-off after that, I think the bottom third of the league is better than the bottom thirds of the other leagues like the ACC and the SEC and the Big 10. So it's been a highly competitive year, and this will be one of the top games of the season, no question about it.
Yeah. And isn't it interesting? I know you know this, the history between Baylor and TCU, 35 straight wins by Baylor in the series going back. And then last year, that streak ends in a big way. And TCU wins all 3 matchups with Baylor last year.
Well, what's the old saying, John? It was a rivalry like a hammer and a nail is a rivalry. Really wasn't much of one for 35 odd years. Yeah.
Right.
So, we were there last year when Baylor was at TCU, and you can just tell that was an important moment. TCU was just a year removed from having open tryouts after they had forfeited a couple of games because they were down so many players, and it was quite the turnaround. And Baylor was playing catch up in that game. They fought, but they came up short, and then low-scoring game here in Waco, and then they met, obviously, for the championship in Kansas City. But that one last year was a big moment for TCU. They knew it had been 35 years since they won, and they celebrated like it was 35 years since they had won. So we'll see what happens in the rematch today. I think they're scuffling a little bit. They're not clicking like they had been. They've lost 2 of 3. Obviously, they have a dynamic player, one of the very best players in the country, in Olivia Miles, but they're not playing their very best right now, so they're trying to figure things out, and this is a tough place to try to figure things out when you're taking on a Baylor team that obviously has got some veterans and some experience, and they know how to take away top players. So it'll be an interesting bit of a chess match tonight.
You very much so, and you have seen in the games you've done for Baylor, and you did the Baylor men's game also in West Virginia, right?
Yeah, that was good. Yeah, that was a good experience. West Virginia fans I had not been there in a few years. They were cranky. They weren't too happy with how things were progressing. And I think, the Baylor men took advantage of that, and they played well, and they handled what is a very tough place to play up at Hope Coliseum. And that was a little double dip weekend for me. The men on Saturday and then the women on Sunday. So there's not quite many more beautiful places than Morgantown on a winter weekend. I think, John, it was 2 below when we woke
Exactly.
up the morning. So yeah, good times. Warmer in New Hampshire, I would say that.
Yeah, really cold. So TV there in Hope Coliseum used to be WVU Coliseum. TV,
Yep.
you're on the side, and all those students are right behind you.
Yep.
And to let our viewers and listeners know, there's no chairs there for the students. If you're going to be in that section, you have to commit to standing up the entire game, which is pretty cool. I don't mind that at all. But could you feel that rowdiness behind you with the students?
Oh yeah, no, they were fired up. They throw the balled up confetti. Like they're ripping pieces of paper, and a lot of it's I don't it's wet, and I don't know what the heck they did to prepare it. So we got hit with some strays. They were very active, and I will say they had done their homework. They had a couple of players who they were targeting, even in the women's game. I can't remember what the line was, but I think it was. Bella Fauntleroy heard the crowd say something, and she even looked up at them. She said, "That was a good one."
Oh, really?
Like something, so that you could hear it. But it was a lot different for the men, and they were really active, really loud. But they got quiet as that game progressed. And they had their players that they were picking on for Baylor. They got quiet after that, and Baylor was the ones who walked off with the win.
Yeah, that was a huge win for Baylor for the men. Yeah. Snapped a 16-game home court winning streak for West Virginia going back to last year. But back to the women, and then the women, that 30 turnover game, unbelievable. Right. I hope it's nothing close to that this evening. But this is a really good matchup. When you go head-to-head, you talk about Olivia Miles and then Baylor with those seniors. I like Baylor's senior leadership. They've been through big games like that. And I think Baylor has a burr under their saddle about going 0-3 against TCU last year.
I would think so. I mean, the things that are different for Baylor, they didn't have Gianna Van Geitenbeek, obviously, for the 3 games last year. I know Little Paige Buggs missed 2 of the 3 with an injury. They didn't have Talia Scott, obviously, transferring in. The one thing that we like about Baylor too is just like there's a few names in this team that you've been following through their entire careers at Baylor. I mean, obviously Scott's a transfer, and every team's going to have some of those, but there's been that kind of development piece and seeing it. Whereas TCU they're the portal team. They tapped into it. Mark Campbell has done a great job of bringing in players. Last year it was Haley Van Lith and Sedona Prince. This year, it's Olivia Miles, and Clara Silva is a player who was at Kentucky last year. Marta Suarez is a player you'll hear a lot about today, who was at Cal last season, starter year at Tennessee. So he's done a really good job of making the pieces all fit, which isn't easy to do in the portal era, as you know, John. There are more misses than hits in trying to make it all fit and all the chemistry work, and it's hard. I think one player right now for TCU who's been there a couple of years playing really well is Donovan Hunter. She's one to keep an eye on. So I agree. I think Baylor will be motivated after getting swept last year, but they're both 2 very different looking teams. Baylor does have the pieces, more pieces compared to last year's team, but it just feels like in this day and age, the rivalries are short-lived. You got those short memories because there's not so many players who were a part of what happened last year. Let alone 2 years ago.
We were, I digress a little bit, but the Baylor men played BYU on Tuesday night here, and that brought Rob Wright back to Waco, who was here as a freshman now at BYU. And it was funny, before the game, some of our GAs and managers were talking to him. None of our players really did. They didn't know Rob. None of our players on the men's side were here last year when Rob was here. So that's kind of a sign of the times.
Right. Right.
Which is crazy. What about
isn't that was the thing too? If I read,
go ahead.
What's that? Sorry, John, I just lost you. I think that was the thing with Baylor too, is it wasn't Baylor and West Virginia 2 of the 5 Power 5 teams who had 100% roster turnover from the previous year? I mean, exactly. Think about that. Like crazy.
I wouldn't wish that on anybody for sure, much less our coaches who had to navigate that. Look at the Big 12 women's big picture. You mentioned, how competitive it is, a lot of parity there. How do you think this plays out? And look down the road, how many NCAA teams might come out of the Big 12 on the women's side?
Hard to say. I think the tournament's going to be really, really compelling just because we're going to have multiple games where there are bubble teams playing each other. So I think the tournament is going to have that feeling of We don't know who's going to win it because I'm looking right now. Easily, you can look at 4 teams who could win the regular season title.
Oh.
Baylor and West Virginia are even in first place. Baylor is, by winning percentage better. West Virginia's played 2 more games. West Virginia has won 4 in a row. They play at TCU next. They lost on a buzzer beater to TCU in Morgantown earlier this year, so that's a rematch. Texas Tech is one of the big stories in all of college basketball. The turnaround they have, they're 10-3. They're very much in the mix. They've won 3 in a row. And then TCU right now is 9-3, so they come into the game here today. So if TCU wins, there'll be a 3-way tie for second. If Baylor wins, they're alone in first. If TCU also wins, West Virginia is alone in first place. So, like I've done the math here and I've, etched it all out. Then you got Oklahoma State and Colorado who are both 8-5. So you got those fights for who's going to be the number 1 and in that coveted top 4. I don't know how you can predict how many teams are going to get in the NCAA tournament because every game there's going to be something on the line here over these next weeks of the season to close out February into March 1st. So I think it's awesome. I think you're talking about multiple teams who can be the number 1 seed. Those 4 teams who are fighting for the number 1 seed might also be fighting to keep a top 4 seed. The tournament outside of playing on, Buck Rogers' floor, as we found out yesterday, is going to be just multiple games where seasons, NCAA seedings on the line, all that kind of stuff. So it's going to be a lot of fun in Kansas City. And over these next weeks, it feels like the playoffs are here now. This will feel like a playoff game here tonight because if you want to be number 1, you don't have much margin for error. And so that's why it's so compelling tonight.
That's cool. That's very well said. Final thought, you saw the release from the Big 12 about the glass floor that'll be at the T-Mobile Center in Kansas City. What do you think about that?
It was at NBA a couple years ago, right? Like we've seen it could do some cool things. The thing I was curious about was, well, what's the surface like? Is it like playing on a glass surface? And both these teams, Baylor and TCU women, they've had a chance to practice on it out in Orlando. If you're playing out near Orlando, UCF, that area, you've had an opportunity to go out there. And they both said it's, we talked to Mark Campbell about it last week whenever we were at TCU. He thought it was really good. It was better than I expected. We're going to go talk to Nikki in a little bit here about it. I think it's kind of in line with the Big 12 is trying to figure out ways to be interesting and draw interest. Last year's court, was a bit of a, Rorschach eye test kind of thing going on, but kids loved it. They were posting stuff on social about it. I think the digital court will be cool. I've seen the tape and the demos of it. I hope for you and I sitting at the court, we can see everything plain as day. The weirdest court I've ever broadcast on is the one in Oregon. That one is just like, you cannot, it just gives me vertigo. I know they've tweaked it and they scaled it back with all the trees there, but why not? Why not try something a little bit different? And as long as it's a competitive and good and safe playing surface, go for it. Be the first. And that's what the Big 12 has continuously tried to do here, it seems.
That's Brett Yormark. Man, that's him in a nutshell right there.
Yep.
Hey, really cool to visit with you. Thank you.
Thanks,
very
John.
much. Glad you're here. Have a great call tonight, and we'll catch up with you again down the road.
Appreciate it. 6 Central Time tonight on ESPN. We'll talk to you all then. Thank you, John.
Perfect.